Welcome, everyone in the US and Israel and Palestine and other places in the world. This is the latest Partners for Progressive Israel webinar as part of the series Conversations with Israel and Palestine. My name is Ron Skolnick, and it's my distinct privilege to organize these webinars on behalf of Partners for Progressive Israel. In just a moment, I'm going to hand it over to today's discussion moderator, Partners Executive Director, Rabbi Margo Hughes-Robinson. But before I do so, I will note that Partners for Progressive Israel is an American not-for-profit. It is dedicated to the achievement of a durable and just peace between Israel and its neighbors, and that will require an end to Israel's occupation and a recognition of the right to national self-determination of both peoples living in the land. Partner supports Israelis working to ensure social justice, Jewish-Arab partnership, and equal rights for all of Israel's inhabitants. The organization wishes to deepen Americans' understanding of Israel's and Palestine's complexities so that they can better advocate for a progressive future for all the inhabitants of the region. Partners for Progressive Israel is delighted to be bringing this webinar to all of you for free. But if you appreciate it and want more programming like it, please visit progressiveisrael.org. And if you can, please make a contribution, even if we've ended 2025 calendar year. I'm going to make a couple of quick notes about upcoming programming before we get going. In 2 days' time, only 2 days, this Wednesday, January 7 at 12 noon Eastern Time, Partners for Progressive Israel's Executive Director and today's moderator, Rabbi Margo Hughes-Robinson, will be interviewed by Rabbi Deborah Kolodny, who directs Alep's Tikkun Haaretz initiative. And that's going to be what's called a conversation on Israel, Gaza, and the charge of genocide. The webinar is a joint Aleph Partners for Progressive Israel production, and it will explore Partners' recently released resource, Genocide, a Guide for Reflection and Discernment. Secondly, next week on Thursday, January 15th at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, we will be hosting a webinar with members of Mothers Against Violence Israel, Imahot Neged Alimut, and that is a nonprofit of Israeli women activists dedicated to ending the occupation and advocating for peace, nonviolence, and a democratic Israel. Before I introduce our guest today and moderator, just a note about the chat and the Q&A. The chat is designed for conversation, for our audience members to comment, ask each other things. But if you have a question for our guest today, please place it in the Q&A. We're not going to be monitoring the chat for questions, and most likely your question there would get lost. So chat is for conversation and questions for the Q&A. Now let's get to our panel today, our guest and our moderator. Let me introduce them so that we can get the discussion going. Sari Bashi, our guest, is an internationally renowned human rights lawyer, the former program director of Human Rights Watch, and the co-founder of the Israeli human rights organization Gisha. She is a graduate of Yale Law School and has previously clerked on the Israeli Supreme Court. She has taught international humanitarian law at Yale Law School and at Tel Aviv University. She's also been a Jerusalem correspondent for the Associated Press and has appeared on and been interviewed by major English language outlets around the world. She and Osama being a pseudonym, are married and living in the West Bank. Sari's the English language edition of Sari's memoir, Upside Down Love, the topic of our conversation today, will be released by Blackstone Publishing this January 20th, 2026. Rabbi Margo Hughes-Robinson is the executive director of Partners for Progressive Israel, the executive director of Partners for Progressive Israel, an organization that connects American progressives in the Jewish world and beyond to progressive movements and leaders in Israel and Palestine. She holds rabbinic ordination and an MA in Midrash from the Jewish Theological Seminary and is also an alumna of the Rabbinic Fellowship at B'nai Jeshurun in New York City. She also holds a CAS certificate in interreligious studies through the Ecumenical Institute at Bossy and the University of Geneva. Rabbi Hughes-Robinson has published in a number of outlets, including Haaretz and The Forward. She was an inaugural cohort member of the Jewish Women Scholars Writing Fellowship and Yeshivat Maharat in Sefaria, and serves currently as both a Ginkgo International Interfaith Fellow and an Executive Leadership Program Fellow at the Mandel Institute. Let me now hand things over to Rabbi Hughes-Robinson, and I'll be back at the end to wrap up proceedings. I hope you find it an enriching webinar.
Thanks so much, Ron. We appreciate it. And thank you again, Sari, for joining us and everybody who joined us this afternoon or this morning, this evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm seeing in the chat, we have folks joining us from the East Coast, the West Coast, from Italy, from the West Bank. Please keep them coming. Again, I'll be keeping an eye as moderator on the Q&A box, but the chat is sort of our social place to build some community with each other. Sari, thanks so much again for being here, and congratulations on the forthcoming English publication of your memoir. Before we get started in earnest, I have questions. I know our attendees have questions. I'd love to just hear actually a little bit of the book itself, since many of us have not yet had a chance to hear it read or to read it. If you'd like to share maybe from the first chapter.
I would love that. And thank you so much for hosting me. And thank you to everybody for joining from very different places. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. I will read from the first chapter of the book, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about it.
Let's go
And
for
the
it.
book, yeah, and the book is organized in alternating chapters between my voice and that of Osama. And this first chapter is in my voice. Sari. I met Osama because he was trapped in the West Bank city of Ramallah. Ramallah was his home and also his prison. Osama was born in the Gaza Strip 2 months after the Israeli occupation began. That explains his name. His father fled to Egypt during the fighting, and so in August 1967, when his mother gave birth, it was up to his uncle to name this baby, whose father was missing because of the military occupation. His uncle chose a strong name. Osama means lion, the animal that no other creature on the savannah can defeat. Because Osama was born in the Gaza Strip, in the Jabalia refugee camp, that is the address listed on his Israeli-approved identification card, even though he moved to Ramallah back in 1985 to study at university and has lived in that West Bank city continuously for more than 2 decades. The state of Israel does not allow Palestinians to change their addresses from Gaza to the West Bank. My area of legal practice is freedom of movement. In 2005, I co-founded an Israeli human rights organization, Gisha, that provides legal assistance to people like Osama, Palestinians, mostly from Gaza, who need permits from the Israeli military to be reunited with family members, reach their jobs or universities, access medical care, or receive professional training. Coincidentally, or not coincidentally, my recreational passion is long distance running. I'm a prominent female runner in Israel's modest and amateur ultramarathon community. In the early mornings and on weekends, I run for hours through cities, fields, parks, villages, and forests. And I feel a boundless sense of freedom, constrained only by the limits of my body's endurance. During the week, I lead a team of lawyers and advocates who help people like Osama overcome restrictions on their freedom to move and travel. When I met Osama in 2006, he had put off his studies for years. He wanted to advance his career, but his world had shrunk to the streets of Ramallah, surrounded by soldiers. The army's laws didn't permit Osama to stay in Ramallah, and he feared getting stopped at a checkpoint if he were to try to leave. Arrest would mean removal to Gaza with no way back. He sought my help in obtaining permits from the military that would let him leave Ramallah to attend a doctoral study program in London and return to the city on breaks. I submitted a petition to the High Court of Justice and reached an agreement with the state via a friendly lawyer in a hostile system to allow Osama to study in London, visit his home during the course of his studies, and return to Ramallah at the completion of his degree program. At that point, he was to resume being trapped. We were lawyer and client. He was different from any man, Israeli or Palestinian, whom I had ever met. He was quiet, gentle, smart, sensuous. He had strong arms that could hold me, black eyes that looked at the world with curiosity, delicate facial features and a trim goatee, the open, innocent smile of a boy. We knew that what we longed for was forbidden, that it could never happen. The more we tried to separate, the more we found ways to stay close.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Not just the text, but also through your memoir, a really intimate look at your relationship. So I'm aware this book was originally published in Hebrew right in 2021, and I'm really curious what it's been like to revisit these words in preparation for the English translation since October 7th, 2023.
I mean, so much has happened. So the book came out in 2021 in Hebrew, and then since the war, really, since October 7th, it's also been published in Italian, Dutch, and this year English and Spanish. And I think for me, the impetus to write the book in Hebrew was I wanted to be able to communicate with readers in a different way. So there may be a lot of people who didn't particularly want to hear about the occupation and wouldn't choose to do that, but they might be interested in a crazy love story. And the hope was that in the course of reading about these characters, they might also see a different side of things. And so that was my goal vis-a-vis Hebrew-speaking readers. And then after the war began, I wanted to see if we could also do that kind of abroad, also knowing there was a lot of interest in what was happening. And in some ways, the look back is has been really nice to see that that what Osama and I have built is resilient. But there's also a part of it that's sad. The book is full of beautiful scenes of visits to Gaza, to places that some of them don't exist anymore. And some of those people aren't around anymore. So I think in that sense, it feels a little heavier, even though the book itself is not that heavy.
Absolutely. I don't know if folks are familiar with, there's a book called On the Pleasures of Living in Gaza, written by a Palestinian Dutch author that very similarly, it was written ahead of October 7th, but holds these scenes, and reading it this past year even, I remember sort of like, they would talk about one interesting activist or people in the neighborhood of the author, and then to see what they were doing now on social media, right? Just the stark pivot to people really just calling out for help, and this flattening of what had been such a rich and interesting place and neighborhoods and cities is so stark. So your work, whether it's cases argued in front of the Israeli Supreme Court or the intensity of your work at Human Rights Watch, exposing the permit regime at Gisha, or your new role as the head of the Public Committee Against Torture in Israel, right, follows you home in a real way. I think a lot of us who sort of do this work professionally, right, are often advised to have sort of a delineation between what we do during the day and then what we do and what we come home to. And in some ways, right, both because of the genesis of your relationship with Osama, but also just the reality of where you live and where you're raising your family, right? There's a different level of integration in your work. I'm so curious what's been supportive for you in navigating that intermingling.
No, it's a great question. I think, in many ways, like the three different most important elements of my life, which is my family, my work, and my running, all come together in a
Mm.
nice way. So I'm a long distance runner, and there's actually a lot of similarities between long distance running and human rights work. So I've run ultra marathons. My longest race was 134 miles. So to finish a race that long, you need a lot of humility. You need to be really aware of the limitations of your own body, how weak you are. And particularly in the beginning, you have to pace yourself. You have to hold back. But in running, there's a concept of a negative split, trying to run the second half of the race faster than the first. And that means that in the first half of the race, when you think you can do anything, you're careful. And in the second half of the race, when you're tired and you think you can't do anything, that's when you find reserves of strength and spring forward. And it's not a bad metaphor for human rights work, because our work is long term. We're going up against systems that are very powerful. And if we can remember to pace ourselves, to be humble, but also wildly ambitious, then we will last, and maybe we will even get somewhere. And parenting is not that dissimilar. My kids are 8 and 11, and if there are any parents listening, you may identify with the concept of endurance sports, and the way that people parent. But I would say that because of the way the human rights abuses that I'm dealing with as a lawyer also affect our daily lives, I hope it makes me a more effective practitioner. I hope it makes me more rooted to the ground and more better able to communicate what's happening.
That makes so much sense. Yeah, and that right, you're not just it's not abstract, but it's something that you're living. You're passing through the checkpoint, I imagine, to get to the places you're litigating. So I think moving maybe from temporarily from the West Bank back to where you grew up in Jersey, you write in your book, your other published works about growing up in a Jewish community that also embraced a really kind of specific narrative about Zionism. And I'm really curious if you're willing to share how your relationship has evolved to the community you grew up in the face of your professional work and your personal life.
Yeah, no, thank you. So I grew up in New Jersey. My father was born in Iraq, but had grown up in Tel Aviv. Like most of the Iraqi Jewish community, he had to leave. And my mother is American. And I grew up in a Jewish community. Our home wasn't political, but if political, right wing, not political, but if political Zionist. And I never thought about it very much because it wasn't, we didn't talk about ideas very much in my house. But when I grew up, I was more curious about the place where my father had grown up. And that's what kind of drew me to come to Israel Palestine as a journalist. And the nice thing about a journalist is your job is to walk around asking people questions and they answer you. And so you get to see a lot and learn a lot. And I think over the course of many years, I saw that the reality in Israel Palestine was different than the one that I had been told as a child. I had been told as a child that I had been taught about Israel Palestine as part of a long line of a history of anti Semitism. So in the Inquisition, they tried to kill Jews. During the Holocaust, they tried to kill Jews. And now Arabs are trying to kill Jews. And it took me a while to pick that apart. It took me a while to realize that I was actually half Arab. My father's Iraqi. It took me a while to realize that what's happening in Israel Palestine is there's conflict, there's violence, but there's also a system of oppression. And I think it was maybe difficult for American Jews to conceive of Jewish leaders being in power and using that power badly. But the reality is, anybody in power will abuse it if allowed to do so. And so, in that sense, I think the time here opened my eyes and allowed me to go on a journey of political development, of the way that I see what's happening in Israel Palestine, and it's an ongoing journey. I would say I'm still learning, and my ideas are still developing.
Absolutely. I'm curious, was there sort of like a cornerstone moment in that development that sort of broke open the previous understanding or what you had grown up with, or was it sort of a series of steps along an evolving journey?
I would say it was a series of steps. And there were moments when I could see the difference, when I could look back. I looked at an article I wrote when I was a college student about some of the violence during the Oslo period in the mid 90s. And I read it and I said, oh, I'm in a different place now. I see different things now. But maybe because the way that I see things in Israel Palestine around a lens of justice, it wasn't a strong reaction or rebellion to the way that I grew up. It was just more an evolution of seeing things. And maybe that's why also it was important to me to write this book, because what I tried to do in the book is just describe what I heard, what I saw, what I tasted, what I smelled, and not draw conclusions for people. So it's an attempt to be as honest as I can. I know what I think, but in the book, I just tried to present the stories that I see, and then let people draw their own conclusions. And I think seeing things for yourself, understanding particular stories, can certainly give us a richer understanding of the world of Israel Palestine, but hopefully a more empathetic understanding as well.
It's beautiful. And I hear even in what you're describing how different it sounds like maybe this book, it sounds like maybe is more in the journalist vein than right legally saying sort of we have a series of precedents that we're threading through an argument, but actually just sort of offering and letting the experiences speak for themselves. In this context is such a different way of bringing up the same realities. I'm so curious actually that when you sort of go home to visit family, or I don't want to be presumptuous about where home is, but like when you come back to the US to visit your family, especially now bringing these kids who have roots in Israel and Palestine, in Iraq, in New Jersey, what is that conversation like?
Well, my kids know how to code switch since they were, my daughter especially, who's the older one. She can switch languages, but not just languages. She can fit in different places, and I'm glad for that. In our home, we speak three languages. So I speak to the kids in Hebrew. My partner speaks to them. My partner is Palestinian from a refugee camp in Gaza, so he speaks to them in Arabic, and he and I speak English to ourselves. So all three languages live in our house, and the kids, their identity, changes and shifts, and I think it'll continue to do so. They get to choose. So when we go to the US, they're excited to kind of fit into an English speaking environment, to be American, and I think that they're very aware of differences. What things are like in the US, what things are like in Palestine, and so it's nice to see them navigate it, and sometimes also like teach adults about it as well.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And I'm curious, like, to what degree do you discuss, it sounds like especially with your daughter who's a bit older, but like as a parent, how transparent are you about the legal aspects of your family situation? And how do you share that with your children? Like, are you talking about the permit regime writ large, or is it sort of more observational, incidental, like, wow, mom and dad have really different experiences at the airport or at a checkpoint? And I think too, if maybe you could sort of draw out also the like legality, even if you moving to the Ramallah area under Israeli and Palestinian law for people who are not as familiar. So maybe sort of you could describe the situation, but also share to the extent that you're willing about how you talk about it as a family.
Yeah, definitely. In the book, one of the things that was very powerful, it was a powerful taboo for my partner and I, was that it was literally illegal for us to be together. So I'm an Israeli Jew. I'm a dual citizenship. What's relevant is the local identity. It meant that I was, by military order, forbidden from entering Area A or Palestinian cities like Ramallah. My partner, like most Palestinians, was barred from entering Israel. So there was literally no space where we were allowed to be together. And so we had to create a forbidden space where we could be together physically, but also fend off a little bit some of the societal expectations that felt overwhelming. And we needed to carve out that space so that we could do what any couple does, which is, try to let our love grow, learn to fight well and make up, learn to trust each other, learn to trust ourselves. In that sense, our love is we were flawed and bad at communicating, like a lot of people are flawed, bad at communicating. But there was this extra layer of wanting to defend that space where we could be an ordinary couple. Those legalities haven't shifted that much, in the sense that my partner, for the most part, can't enter Israel, but my family, my extended family, is there. Our kids grew up knowing that Baba couldn't come with us to a Passover Seder, or Baba couldn't come with us to a family dinner at a restaurant or to the sea. And my daughter, who's the older one, what I would tell her when she was small is that the soldiers at checkpoints are having trouble sharing. And so they're not letting through everybody. They're only letting some people through. And Ima and Baba don't agree. And we think everybody should be allowed to go through. And there was an incident with her that I wrote about it on my blog, actually, that I think is an example of how sometimes kids can understand things better than adults. And that things in Israel Palestine may have complications, but it's actually a little bit simple. So one day when she was about 5, I was taking her and her brother to a memorial service in Tel Aviv for my uncle who passed away. And we hit a surprise checkpoint. So the soldiers were just blocking exit from a Palestinian area. So I turned around to try to find another way to go. And so she said, Ema, why are you turning around? And I said, well, you remember those soldiers at the checkpoint, the ones who have trouble sharing? Well, they're not letting us through, so we have to turn around. And she said, but Ema, we're Jews. And that was actually the first time I'd heard her refer to herself as Jewish. And nobody had ever told her what a regime of discrimination is, what a regime that many people think is an apartheid regime is. But she did what every 5-year-old does. She looked around the world and she drew conclusions from what she saw. And what she saw is that Jews can and Palestinians can't. And that's why it was confusing for her when I, as a Jewish person, couldn't travel. Um, and I think, to some extent, there's a lot of legalities and complications and permits and things. But what's happening here is actually simple. Um, there's a two-tiered regime where Jews have a lot of rights and Palestinians don't have enough. And I guess I try to learn from my daughter in terms of being able to distill that simplicity. And I think other people who are parents, you may identify with this, that when you're asked to explain something complicated to your kids, you sometimes understand it better because you have to break it down to the essence of what it is.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we were talking about right, even in preparation for this call, I so relate to that with my 4-year-old even of trying to explain to him a little bit of like what we do for work and our family's values and where it sometimes, why he can't travel to Israel Palestine with me right now or why he could at certain moments. And I don't know, right now he's very stuck on the we're Hanukkah people. I think it's just seasonal, but he'd be like, so Hanukkah people can do this, but like Christmas and Ramadan people cannot. I'm like, exactly, you've nailed it. It is very illuminating, I think, to have it sort of that start. But also say like as a rabbi, like, oh, ouch, that right, a child's first self-definition of their Jewish identity is, well, I can go
Yeah,
through a checkpoint. Yeah,
yeah.
is such a diagnosis of the reality on the ground right now. Um, I'm curious, sort of connected to that, on our most recent partners webinar last month, we also featured another Palestinian resident of Mukhmas in the West Bank who holds American citizenship. And I think that a lot of folks with American citizenship living here in the US are not aware of both the benefits within the Palestinian context, but also the limitations that their fellow citizens living in Palestine are experiencing. I'm just curious, like, how has that manifested on the ground the last 2 years?
Yeah, I mean, there's actually been a lot of movement on that front because for a long time, the Israeli authorities almost didn't pay attention at all to dual citizenships that people held. So, still formally, the Israeli authorities will treat people according to the local identity. So, they'll treat me as Israeli, they'll treat my partner as Palestinian. But just before the war, there was a deal to basically allow Israelis into the United States visa-free. And the reciprocity was supposed to be that US citizens would be allowed into Israel visa free. So it didn't work out quite 100% reciprocal, but it meant that the Israeli government made it easier for Palestinian Americans, Palestinian citizens of the United States, to be able to get temporary visas on their US passports. And so Osama was naturalized. We spent a little bit of time in the US, and he now holds US citizenship. And so he was actually able to get a few permits on the US passport. And that was really, really nice for us. It meant that he could travel using the airport. He actually did come with us to the sea a couple of times. And there are a fair number of US citizens living in the West Bank. But it doesn't get you as far as one might want. So I'm sorry to say that a number of US citizens have actually been killed by Israeli forces in villages where there's been violence. And in that sense, they are treated as Palestinian. And I cannot say that the US government has done enough to ask for accountability and proper investigations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's kind of related to that a question in the Q&A that I want to lift up. Does your husband have any access to East Jerusalem under the current permit situation? Is it like a one-off visa or a regular, or is that sort of able to sometimes be a third space for your family?
Usually not. So the Israeli government annexed East Jerusalem in 1967 and considers it to be part of Israel. And also the way the wall and the checkpoint regime works is that large parts of the West Bank are also off limits to Palestinians. So there's a series of walls and gates and checkpoints that basically create cantons, enclaves of Palestinian towns and cities sometimes hopefully with roads between them, but then Jewish only areas of the West Bank and then Israel itself. And for the most part, Palestinians can't enter those areas. And even people like me, who I'm allowed to enter those areas, it actually takes a very long time to get there because the roads are closed. So every Palestinian town is surrounded by yellow or orange iron gates that sometimes are open, but often are not. And so you could imagine if you're in, I don't know, the city of Philadelphia, imagine imagine there was a big wall around it, and then one or two gates were open. It would take a very long time to get anywhere. And so that's kind of the situation for us. And while my partner can sometimes get visas, it's kind of, it's a bit hit or miss, and it's certainly not all the time.
Of course. I'm wondering too what the mood in the Ramallah area right now is like more broadly. I don't know if everybody on this call is aware, but within the wider situation in the West Bank, right? Amnesty International just last month declared the expulsions from and then permanent destruction of refugee camps in the West Bank by the Israeli military in January and February of 2025 last year were not only illegal but tantamount to war crimes. Right, that like I think many people rightly have had their focus deeply on Gaza, but I'm curious just what it's like day to day right now in the West Bank and what it's feeling like.
Yeah, I mean, I think appropriately people have been more focused on Gaza since October 7th, 2023, but the violence has also spiked in the West Bank with more than 1,000 Palestinians killed since then, mostly by security forces, but also by settlers. And one of the biggest changes is the extent to which the violence here has become decentralized. So settlers coming to Palestinian villages, engaging in vandalism, firebombing homes, hurting people and sometimes shooting people to death. And that's being done either with the army turning a blind eye, or in some cases, soldiers also participating. And that's really scary because decentralized violence, you can't clamp down on it easily, even if you want to. And so people are self-censoring. People are, we just had the olive harvest in October and November, and a lot of people couldn't reach their trees or were afraid to. There's been a really wonderful increase in what we call protective presence. So it used to be international volunteers accompanying Palestinian farmers for olive harvest, accompanying moms trying to leave the village to get medical care for their kids. But so many of those international activists have not come for a variety of reasons, the war, flights, but also not being denied visas now because it's harder to get into Israel as a foreigner. And so Israeli Jews have actually picked up some of the slack. And there's a strong movement toward protective presence where you'll have Israelis coming and just being alongside Palestinians, but you internalize a sense of constraint because it's so hard to travel, because it feels more dangerous, because it's unpredictable. So you just don't know how long it's going to take you. And that I would say is combined with a very, very difficult economic situation. So, more than 100,000 Palestinian workers have not been allowed to reach their jobs in Israel since October 7th, 2023. And that was a huge source of remittance. The finance minister, who's quite right wing of Israel, has been squeezing Palestinian banks and creating all kinds of irregularities in terms of the money supply. There's obviously no tourism, and more farmlands and industrial zones are functionally becoming off limits. So the economic situation is also quite difficult here. So people are feeling, under fire a little bit.
Absolutely. And then in the midst of it, it sounds like, you like many other thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of other parents and spouses are like still raising a loving family in the middle of this. Like I'm wondering if you could like speak about that also, what it means to sort of have the deeply personal in the midst of this political place and to do it in these overlapping Venn diagrams of identity.
Yeah. I mean, I sometimes feel like our house is right and everybody else is wrong. In the sense that, like, in our house, Judaism and Islam live together. Like, my partner's really good at keeping a kosher kitchen. I've gotten pretty good at baking like the date cookies for Eid al-Fitr, which is a Muslim feast. our kids move naturally through the three languages. And English, Hebrew, and Arabic, they're the languages of this land. They're native to this land. And the truth is, Palestine, the Levant, they've always been pluralistic. And they've always, nothing was ever perfect, but they've always been able to contain Christians and Jews and Muslims and different kinds of languages and different kinds of identities. And so to some extent, I feel like in our house, we have this wonderful privilege to be able to live that with a naturalness. And I think we see the naturalness most with my kids, because my son can start a sentence in Arabic, continue in English, and finish in Hebrew. It's just it flows in the way that things are natural for children until somebody teaches them that it's not. And so my kids are definitely at an age where they're becoming more aware of the world and they're hearing messages that it's not. But I think what we're trying to do is to just, well, actually, no. I mean, there's nothing natural or inevitable about violence here, about conflict. There are problems we need to solve. There's an oppressive system of government that needs to be transformed. But the people can be okay with each other, and they can be human. And I can just say one last thing. In the book, one part of what I hoped for in the book, so half the chapters were written in my voice, half the chapters were written in Osama's voice. And my hope was that my voice would be a window for Israeli readers and maybe also for American Jewish readers to be able to hear and to access Osama's voice, and that his voice would be a vehicle, a route for Palestinian readers to be able to hear my voice. And what I tried very hard to do is to tell the truth, meaning that the people in the book, there are people who are doing wonderful things. There are people who are doing terrible things. They're not monsters. They're human beings. Some deeply flawed human beings. Nobody there is perfect. And my hope is that that can maybe transform the conversation about Israel-Palestine, which so often seems to descend into who's morally more righteous, which is a very interesting conversation to have. And instead, the idea is, let's just look at these human beings, even the human beings who are doing very bad things, and can we see the systems that are constraining them, and can we see them as human beings as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll say this is what I find so bolstering about a human rights lens in this work, right? Is that sort of it's there. It's not something they're inalienable. That like no matter what choices a person makes individually or the impact of systems, the idea that there's this undercurrent that we're all supposed to understand of basic things that we owe to one another and basic things that we all deserve, this foundation of shared humanity. And it's amazing to hear the way in which it sounds like your kids are sort of in some ways both native speakers of three languages, but like natives of this shared identity that's rooted in what has been true in the land for a very, very long time, despite the current situation. There's a lot of questions in the Q&A that I think I'll try to combine a couple into one about your relationships with the wider Palestinian community in the West Bank, as well as I imagine it's on some level it's much easier with your Jewish colleagues in Israel, but with the like Jewish Israelis in your life, your family, or just more broadly, what those relationships look like. How do they see you or see your family? Do you see these communities that you're interacting with? What is it like to sort of just move through again with this doubling of relationship?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's something that's evolved. Also, in the book, one of the things that I write about is my attempt to fit in Ramallah, which is not easy. And I think in the beginning, I tried to keep a very low profile. And there's scenes in the book where Osama and I are almost arguing about, speaking Hebrew. He's closing the window so that nobody will hear. And as I had kids and as my kids got older, I changed the way that I live here. I wanted to be upfront and open with people about who I am, in part because I didn't want my kids to feel like they needed to be ashamed, but also just to kind of get it over with. It's like let's move on. And one of the things that's been the most striking for me is people's response to the Hebrew language. So I remember when with Osama, and I read about this a little bit in the book, the first time he heard me speak Hebrew, it was hard for him. It was hard for him to hear a language that he associates with violence, with being tortured in prison. in the mouth of the woman he loves. And that was one of the many things we had to work through. But with my kids, I remember I took my daughter home from the hospital, and I speak to her in Hebrew. And I'd been like she was premature, so I was in the hospital with her for quite some time. So I was just used to being in a Hebrew speaking environment with her. And then, as soon as she came home, like, friends wanted to come and see the new baby. So they came and she was sleeping. And then she woke up crying. And so I went to pick her up, and I was like, in the googly voices that mothers use, saying, "Oh, sweetheart, I'll give you some milk. It's okay," in Hebrew. And as soon as they heard me speaking Hebrew, they froze. And then they laughed. And they had never heard Hebrew spoken with tenderness before. Um, so we had to get past that. But then I feel like getting past it meant I could continue speaking to my daughter in Hebrew. And also for them, there was a little bit of, oh, it's actually, it's not, the violence is not inherent to the language. And I hope that we challenge people a little bit like that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a lot of Ashkenazi Jews, even particularly children of Holocaust survivors, who've had similar experiences with different languages being heard and what we immediately associate. And I'm not in any way conflating those two experiences more broadly historically, but rather just the linguistic, like, oh, this is a language in which people are having whole lives and can be whole people, and it's not limited to the painful flashpoints we may have previously experienced in Arabic or in Hebrew. Um,
Yeah, and Arabic and Hebrew actually, like, part of our family has been this journey of discovery, because my partner will hear me speak Hebrew to the kids, and he'll recognize Arabic words. He'll be like, "Oh, that's how you say that," and I'll do the same thing because they're very similar.
totally. And I'm curious also, right, if you said your father grew up mainly in Tel Aviv, but to have also like roots in an Arabic speaking country in Iraq, like how is that factored in also, like this sort of ancestral muscle memory as well here?
So what was nice was that for me, learning Arabic through Osama, through living here, was a way of discovering my father's forgotten native tongue. And then the very few times that Osama met I have they've passed away since, but I had uncles and an aunt who would speak Arabic. And so to watch him, but it was like an Iraqi Arabic, Jewish dialect that was spoken a very long time ago. So to watch the
I was
two of
gonna
them.
ask, like, does everybody have to like pivot to Fusha, like very formal Arabic, or is it just like between dialect, like?
I mean, at a certain point, it was Islamic saying, "Could we switch to Hebrew, please?" Because he couldn't understand them. But I mean, it's a beautiful kind of rediscovery. And then I think beyond that, like some of the foods and the culture, sometimes he'll even look at, like, we'll look at photos of our fathers as young men. And to be clear, right, my father fought in the 1967 war that led to Osama's father being permanently exiled. But if you look at the photos, they were both young Arab guys. And if you look at the family history, even beyond that, like I would discover things about my grandfather, like they were all just part of the Ottoman Empire. And it was one area, one space.
When you talk about regimes also, right? Like how different that, wow, 3, 4 generations back, that both families sort of were actually under the same regime.
Yeah.
But like in, hundreds, if not thousands of miles apart. How quickly this all changes also in the
And
span
how quickly
of
it can change again.
exactly the life of a family. Yes. So I think a lot of people, right, I'm sure you get this a lot. On any webinar we host at Partners, people are asking the question, and I'm so grateful people are asking the question, what can we do to be part of this with you, to help or to be in solidarity as Americans, as Israelis. I know we have a lot of people also from Italy and the UK on the call. How do we get more deeply involved in the project you're living?
Yeah. So first of all, you can buy the book, and maybe we could put it into the chat so people can buy it if they want. But I think, I think that there's a really important moment now in the United States. The United States government has been backing the Israeli government for decades, militarily, economically, and diplomatically. And we're starting to see some cracks in that automatic support. And particularly among younger members of the Jewish community, a questioning of whether it's actually the right thing, for example, to be selling weapons to, or in some ways gifting weapons to a military that's using them to commit pretty serious abuses. And I think that it's very important for American Jews to be engaged in their communities. So in Israel-Palestine, power is being abused, but it's being abused because it can be abused. And American support, official American support for the Israeli government is a big, big part of it. And I think that's where the change lies. I think that as American Jews maybe take a more critical approach to what's going on in Israel-Palestine, and look at values of justice that are deeply embedded in Judaism, there's an opportunity to really shift certainly public opinion, but eventually official U.S. policy. And that work is probably more influential and more important than the work I'm doing. I'm the new director of an organization called the Public Committee Against Torture in Israel. So we're visiting detainees who are being tortured. We're trying to stop the torture. But the reality is that that torture is being empowered by support from outside and in the United States. And so actually, a lot of the people on this call have more power than I do to do something about that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So call to action, really, yeah. And that I think it's easy for us to see this coming through our screens or from conversations with family and friends in the land, right? Yeah, and to feel secondarily, but actually the power differential is so stark that right now American Jews have a uniquely whether we like it or not, we have a kind of unique access to the power to make a real change in this situation. Um, so I wanted to pivot sort of on a different note. In your New York Times piece last summer, that's linked in the emails if folks got a partner's email to register for this webinar. I was so struck by something that you wrote about the description of the way that your spouse has worn a piece of ribbon on his lapel to count the days since the war in Gaza began. And I thought immediately also of Rachel Goldberg Polin, who's famously worn sort of a piece of white tape counting on her shirt, counting the days until the Israeli hostages in Gaza were returned. So I'm so hesitant to collapse this resonance into a reaction that like flattens the power differential between Israelis and Palestinians at large. Um, right, actually, what your spouse and Rachel Goldberg Polin had in common is that like people they loved were in Gaza and in danger as civilians, right, who had nothing to do with the military conflict around them. But it's so striking to see the ways in which the emotional reactions of individual people worried about their family members in Gaza actually look so similar. And I'm so curious, like as someone who lives in the Venn diagram of these experiences, how do you hold it? How do you reconcile it? Do you just kind of hold it two pieces separate? How does it live in your world?
I mean, first of all, I'm so glad that you see them as being similar in terms of that human experience, because I think one of the biggest challenges since October 7th has been selective empathy, selective values, selective support for justice. For me, and I think for many people here, one of the things that was most painful about October 7th was that we didn't know who we could talk to. Like we didn't know who we could trust because we thought we had shared values, universal values of humanity, of respect for human life. And then we discovered that maybe actually it wasn't so universal. And to some of us, and I think maybe some people on this call as well, probably discovered that also among people that they cared about and trusted. So that was hard. So thank you for seeing that the humanity of just human beings being worried for their family members. And I can say for my partner that it was like watching somebody you love go through hell. And to be clear, like we were lucky, we were in the West Bank, we were much safer, but his entire family was and is in Gaza. And he knew that there was nothing he could do. And he would watch his neighbors' homes being bombed, knowing they were inside, and just praying his family was okay. And that's my wish is that anybody hearing that story or anybody hearing Rachel's story about loving her son can, at the very least, connect to that human experience because it can't be selective. Empathy and love cannot be selective.
And I so appreciate what I'm hearing and what you're sharing is that it's not selective, and it also doesn't leave behind the specificity. That it can be a universal emotion and specific in, these aren't just faces or people that make, but like these are our neighbors and family and beloveds. Um, oh, I'm like just taking a minute to sit with it. It's not something one moves on from easily, even when we have questions in the Q&A. Um, I'm also really, really curious, right, as a parent, as a partner, again, as somebody who where right at the beginning of your relationship, the access differential and the power differential between you and Osama was so stark. You and your partner, it sounds like, have tried to protect your partner's identity by using a pseudonym, and at the same time lifting up his voice because half of the memoir is his. But I'm curious what it's been like to sort of thread that needle of giving a voice and sharing the space, and also like the concerns about being exposed or backlash, especially someone who's the parent of young children as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think, I'm actually a very introverted person. And it because it can be hard for me to share, actually writing is something that I find easier and also very fulfilling. Because when you write something personal, there's two steps. There's the writing when you're alone with a computer or a piece of paper. And if you're an introvert, that's your happy spot. And then there's the decision to share it. And there's something about splitting those two parts up that makes it easier for me because I can do it in stages. And then there's the part that I do want to share and I do want to connect to people. And so writing feels like a safer way to do it. When you're writing about your family, it's a little more complicated, because even if you choose to share about yourself, the people around you in your scope of vision didn't decide that. And so I think, Osama's been incredibly generous in allowing me, encouraging me to write the book, to publish the book. And, I think it's hard. For many years I wrote a blog regularly about raising my kids in the West Bank. That's what if you go to the link in the chat, that'll take you to that website. And I still write sometimes, but much less because my kids are older. And it's more complicated. And the other thing I would say is that, in terms of using a pseudonym, the power dynamics between him and me have not changed, and it is not in our power to change it. And the truth is, in a system of racialized discrimination, you don't get to choose your place in the racial hierarchy. It's assigned to you, whether it's up or down. And so that's what's assigned to us. I have privilege, I have power that he doesn't have, and my response to life reflects that. I walk through life with the footing of somebody who has mostly been safe, and he walks through life with the footing of somebody who is waiting for the floor to fall out from under him, and sometimes it does. So we just have to navigate that, and part of that means that there are things that I can say in my own name, where he's more vulnerable.
Absolutely. And it sounds like it's just even from the way you speak about it, right? I can hear sort of the layers of probably also internal family conversation and public conversation that have been had to be negotiated even to get to this point. Um, so I think we're not quite at the end of our time, but as we start to wrap up, I'm really curious also what is I feel like asking you, like, what is giving you hope almost feels like a cliche at this point. But where are you finding a sense of nourishment, or like you said, that second split, that energy reserve to move on? Is it a vision that's powering you of what could be different? Is it sort of the what you've built in your home with your family? Where's that energy reserve from the second split? Where are you finding it?
Well, first of all, from running. So I still run every day, and I still love it, and I still would keep going if I could. It's time that pulls me back, but it's a good friend. It's a very good friend, and it gets me out in the morning with light, and now it's cold air, and also it lets me just transgress villages and areas and parks and kind of see the world with the freshness of morning light. But I think, for me, there's a strong sense of hope that's also sober. What I see right now in Israel Palestine is a lot of things collapsing. Um, whether it's physical collapse, like the destruction in Gaza and also in the northern West Bank, whether it's the collapse of systems, like things within the Israeli government that at least had a narrow veneer of credibility, professionalized civil service, a professional army that was disciplined, which, you know, just that's all being broken down now in the sense that the systems that kept the Israeli system functioning are being dismantled and are descending into violence and arbitrariness. And you know, many leadership positions, including among the security forces, are being taken up by people with violent messianic visions. So that's very scary. But when something collapses, there's an opportunity to build it back up. And things are collapsing very quickly, and there are windows of opportunity all the time now. I mean, for folks on the call, just imagine what the conversation about Israel-Palestine was like in your community 3 years ago and what it's like now. There's been a huge shift. And that means that the work we do now to build power, to build back something different and better, is more powerful than ever. And so that not only gives me hope, it gives me motivation, because there's a lot of potential right now to do good work and to build something different in Israel-Palestine than we've had for a while.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, for me, it brings to mind so much like one of the teachings of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov in the 1800s, right? If you believe in or if you're witnessing breaking, you must also believe in repair and reconstruction in a really different way. That this is a moment of real opportunity, not despite the pain, but actually like because of this horrible breakdown we're witnessing. I'm going to pass it back over to my colleague Ron in a moment, but Sari, I really want to just thank you again for bringing both your all of your professional expertise and also your openness and your heart to this conversation. I so appreciate it. I am sure I don't want to speak for our attendees, but I will when I say I know that they appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to the participants for joining and for the work you do.
Thank you, Sari. Thank you, Margo. Sari, I really appreciate how you offered a personal way to examine the political and some basic simplicities, as you said, that underlie what truly are complexities, but there are simplicities that underlie that. And thank you for sharing that and sharing, personal things about your life today. For those who missed the opening, I'm just going to note again, as I'm moving on from the thanks and saying goodbye, two more webinars from Partners for Progressive Israel. So mark down January 7th and January 15th. The 7th is an interview with today's moderator, Partners Executive Director, Rabbi Margo Hughes-Robinson, who will discuss the question of genocide as it relates to Gaza, and that's a co-sponsored webinar between Partners and the Aleph Alliance. And January 15th, we'll be hosting representatives of Mothers Against Israel, Israeli women activists dedicated to ending the occupation. Last thing, while today's program has been free, generous contributions enable the organization to deliver these events at no cost. So besides going out and ordering Sari's book, please visit progressiveisrael.org, check out upcoming programming, and if you can, please make a donation. We hope to see you next time, which is this Wednesday, the webinar together with the Aleph Alliance. Take care, everyone.